Hi, I'm Stephen Brown, and I'm with my senior advisor colleagues from the KPMG Board Leadership Center, Claudia Allen, Susan Angeli, and Annalisa Barrett. And we're here to talk about considerations for the board in 2021. As we do annually at the Board Leadership Center, we highlighted a number of issues for directors to keep in mind for 2021 for publicly traded, private boards, audit committees, compensation committees, nom and gov committees for directors to consider as they go about carrying out their 2021 agendas. We drew on our latest survey work and interactions with directors and business leaders for these on the agendas. Each can be found on our website. Today, I'm here with my colleagues to talk about some of those insights. And I'll start with you, Susan, first. Now, if 2020 stands for some of the most troubling crises that people, firms, communities, and boards, of course, could ever face, COVID-19, recession, deep-seated social unrest, and an increasingly polarized America, 2021 has to stand for at least something better than that. In your mind, what should be top of mind for boards this year?
Thanks, Stephen. So I think the first thing that really needs to be top of mind is to harvest those lessons learned from the crises of the past year before they get too far into the rear mirror. And there's really an opportunity for boards to play a role in helping their companies do this. Fortunately, there's an end in sight to some of the issues we experienced in 2020. But as we think about what's happened over the past year, and frankly, over, certainly the first half of the coming year as well, because we have an end in sight, but we're not out of the woods yet. There's really three areas that rise to the top for me in this whole topic of crisis oversight and resiliency. And the first is to engage the company in an assessment of whether the organization had the right people, processes, and decision-making structure in place to navigate the various storms. And if not, what needs to change? And as that assessment is done, I think the tone is really important. Management, organizations, the board itself, everyone has been through a lot. And this really is, it's not about pointing fingers, placing blame. It's about really, sort of pulling together and saying, what can we do? What happened with our supply chain? What happened when it came to safety of employees and customers? And financial liquidity, which was an enormous issue for some companies. How do we harvest the lessons that were learned and use those to become better and better as the company moves on to the future? Second, we know the crisis that happened in 2020. We know others will happen. And so how do we think about some of the ones that we know are going to happen? For example, cybersecurity is a big issue, continues to be a big issue, will be a bigger issue, and also increasingly data governance as kind of a broader category affecting companies' reputation as well as operations. So how is what we learned about people, processes, resiliency from the past year going to help the companies as they think about other issues? Climate change, obviously, is an enormous looming crisis as well. And so how does it help to think about these other issues and prepare for them? And then really the third is about stepping back and looking for alignment throughout the organization. So did the enterprise risk management system pick up, at least to the extent possible, the types of issues that you would have expected the company to be on top of over the past year? And was there a link between enterprise risk management, crisis preparation, and then the actual operations for resiliency? So, again, this is something where there can always be continuous improvements, but it's a great opportunity to step back. And then just, look, for many companies, 2020 was the first time that the younger members of management had been through a significant crisis. Boards, particularly board members who have been through the financial crisis, other crises, really have a lot to offer in terms of wisdom, perspective, and helping to guide people through. And again, we're not out of the woods yet. We have an end in sight, but as things continue in 2021 and beyond, boards do have a lot to offer when it comes to crisis management. So I'm going to stop there and turn over to you, Annalisa. What do you think should be top of mind for boards in 2021?
Well, thank you, Susan. And I really like the idea of learning from the events of 2020 and taking that forward throughout 2021 and going forward. And one of the big shifts that we saw in discussions in corporate boardrooms and within companies in general is related to the people within the organization, human capital management specifically. And we saw not only the COVID-19 crisis, but as you mentioned, also the events related to the death of George Floyd and the important conversations that are being had throughout our society regarding systemic racism, inequality, and those issues as they permeate throughout companies and affect the people that are driving the performance of the corporations that boards are overseeing. There's so many issues for boards to think about. And so, the first is certainly, during this year, we saw a kind of unprecedented focus on the health, safety, and well-being of employees. And to the extent that, boards were very focused on ensuring that the people throughout the organization were safe at work or working from home. And so I think that is something that, while it's been an issue that has been on the agenda for boards in some industries for a long time, having that be continued as a topic of discussion in the boardroom, especially as it relates to during 2021, the approach the company takes to integrating people back into offices to the extent that it's safe to do so, and to the extent that we have people continuing to work from home, how that may impact issues such as the corporate culture, people's engagement with their work, and their productivity, certainly. Another issue within the human capital management area that's really going to, has surfaced this year, but has been in place for decades, as you mentioned, Susan. That's something that boards are uniquely have a unique perspective to oversee, is to ensure that they're watching out for signs of inequality throughout the organization and unconscious biases that may be permeating throughout policies and decision making throughout the company. So whether that's asking for details regarding the hiring, development, and advancement of people from underrepresented groups to ensure that there are or to ensure that there's progress made regarding giving everyone opportunities despite their gender, their racial and ethnic background, their sexual orientation, and all different aspects of what makes people unique and able to contribute to organizations in meaningful ways. Another is to think about, from the board level, ensuring that the commitments that so many companies and corporate leaders have made during 2020 regarding their goals for internally addressing systemic racism, whether it's through increasing training and development opportunities, or increasing hiring, and also through philanthropy and supporting underrepresented communities outside of their organization as well. Ensuring that those commitments are followed through on, and that management is held accountable for continuing to integrate those types of commitments, and the kind of the passion and the commitment that is being voiced throughout 2020 continues and is really built into being part of the systems, policies, and practices that lead throughout the organization. And the last is just to make sure, what what investors are asking for is the board to represent them in ensuring that the investments that are made in the capital that is invested in the people of the organization is done so fairly and is done so in a way that that drives long-term performance and long-term sustainability. So with that, I know, Stephen, I'd like to get your thoughts, and I know you've been thinking a lot about what investors are looking for and other stakeholders as well.
Sure. And you touched on human capital management, which I think is so deeply important and may be difficult because traditionally they may have been thought of more softer issues for management and the board, or certainly that management takes care of those issues and the board's focused on something else. And not so as we move forward in 2021. I think there's so many issues for the boards to tackle. And if I think of one big issue that has to hit that agenda, it's paying a lot more attention to stakeholders in general. And we in America have become more familiar with this word stakeholders, which is everyone and anything that could be affected by the company. But in particular, shareholders and employees. And again, part of this is my bias is that I'm an employee and I've been one for a while. And I've also been a shareholder, a head of governance of a major institutional investor and believe in that deeply. First, on the shareholder point, if we think through the large institutions, whether it's BlackRock to Vanguard to State Street and many, many others, are deeply committed to human capital management, to ESG, to many other issues, because not simply from a moral issue, but from a business imperative standpoint. And they are being a lot more forceful today than they were 5 years ago. They will be a lot more forceful this year in 2021 than they were last year. And as I often say, because it's absolutely true, the only natural predator that a director has is a shareholder. They're the only people imbued by law with the right to take away their jobs. So it behooves them to pay attention to what they're saying. And by the way, they're being explicitly clear. These days, whether it's putting out their own reports on what they want, sort of a year in review and a year preview, what they're looking for in the year coming up, is so deeply important. And also, that other group of shareholders beyond institutions are those activist investors who may have been a little bit muted as they've gone through COVID-19 over the last year. What they do for a business is go after boards, and they're going to continue doing that. And I think about the issues around human capital management and ESG as soft spots, where if the institutional investors, along with the activist investors, can really make the business case about the business imperative about those particular issues where boards have fallen short, then that's the soft spot where they will attack. Obviously, the reaction to that is, don't let those spaces be soft spots, whether it's human capital management or ESG, and allow those activists with a big A, these hedge fund activists, to find a wedge. Now, I said activists with a big A. I often say that to distinguish from activists with a small a, those folks who don't get the headlines, who may sometimes be non-economic activists, but I wanted to turn to employees, because many times employees are also your shareholders. And they're becoming a lot more active these days, where they wear their values on their sleeves, and they're willing to confront management, their own management, on these issues. And so I think about shareholders, I think about employees as the major stakeholders. And my issue for boards to really think about is to really get to understand them and to ask what's on their mind. And indeed, when we think about employees, this summer in the United States, many companies did ask employees how they were doing during the COVID-19, how they were doing dealing with the social unrest that America was experiencing over the summer. So they asked that question and they got responses. They got really honest responses. And we have to remember that and learn from that and look into what employees want, because they told you for the first time ever, more so than in an anonymous survey, which employees fill out every year, they told you directly, what they're interested in. Many of the issues which you talked about, Annalisa, and I think going forward, there are no. I hate to use a sports analogy, but I'm going to use it. There are no more mulligans being handed out. There are no more do-overs. And so it's really important that we get this right as boards, and it's deeply important for the long-term survival and the long-term thriving of the corporation. So that's sort of the one thing I think about that has to hit the agenda. Really thinking about shareholders and employees. Claudia, what's the one thing that boards should make sure is on their agenda?
Well, Stephen, I think a lot about CEO succession because I think it's a window into a large number of issues that boards need to grapple with. It's an area of relative weakness for many boards. Many directors recognize that. So I think it's ripe for rethinking. And we know that in the first half of the year, there was a sharp drop off in the rate of CEO turnover. So we're probably going to see more CEO turnover as the crisis eases. And the health, the economic, the racial crises that have gripped our nation have caused many companies to have to pivot on their strategies or to reset their strategies. And I think that raises the really interesting question of, is your CEO successor pipeline filled with individuals who have the skills necessary to execute on the revised strategy? And frankly, there are similar issues for boards themselves. Do we have directors with the skills necessary to oversee execution of the strategy? But getting back to the CEO candidates, first I think you look at the hard skills, and those hard skills have changed at many companies. For example, I think digital fluency is something that all CEOs need to have. It's a vital one. And in some way, almost all companies can now be labeled tech companies. So you need to be able to speak in terms of digital. ESG is something you talked about, issues of risk and opportunity. Another area where CEOs need to be very fluent and to be able to communicate, for investors, as you mentioned, who are making investment and voting decisions, for the employees who are deciding whether to work at a company, for the customers who are deciding whether to buy, particularly millennials, and it's so vital to reputation. And then if candidates do lack hard skills, I think the board needs to be talking with management about who needs more development in a given area and how are we going to get that individual the development he or she needs. And I think the emphasis on that is important because a lot of the data shows that CEOs are most successful typically when they come internally. Not always, but more are successful when they are homegrown. And then I think, again, these crises have highlighted the importance of soft skills, which I think were often underpaid in the past. But now we're talking about how important it is for CEOs to have genuine empathy, which I don't think is something we would have talked about 5 years ago. So empathy and transparency. Can they bring the employees and other stakeholders along with them with a shared vision and then execute on it? And the CEO also has to be the individual who conveys and is able to instill the culture and values of the organization. And culture and values have been stressed by the work from home environment. So you want to have a culture champion, and you want to make it easy to have a culture and a set of values that makes it simple for employees to make complicated decisions. They know what's right, what's wrong. And I think lastly, COVID has really heightened the importance of having an effective and written emergency succession plan. We've seen CEOs, some in Europe, die in office. So if nothing else, this tells us you really need to have a plan that's written. And you need to figure out who interim CEO successor candidates would be. Sometimes it's the general counsel or CFO. Sometimes a member of the board will step up. And again, I think you also need to plan for the unpleasant but very realistic possibility that there could be more than one vacancy at the same time. So you need a robust plan. And then to the extent somebody steps in the interim slot, the board needs to be prepared to support that individual in the areas that may be relatively weak for that individual. And also, we know as a practical matter that interim candidates rarely turn into the permanent successor. So effectively, you need to have these two processes running simultaneously, to have an emergency plan, to have a long-term plan, and not to just do it once and assume it's done. But these should be living documents that are looked at repeatedly. And I think the crisis from COVID, et cetera, has offered an opportunity to look at many individuals in the succession pipeline. And some of those individuals probably have become stars during this crisis. and others may not have performed as robustly as you would have expected. So it really is time to rethink. So let me turn it back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything that you said. I agree with everything that my wonderful, brilliant colleagues, everyone has said. And as we think about wrapping up here, and all of us have been in the governance space for quite some time. If I add it up, I dare say we might hit the triple digits, except for me. I've just started out of high school last year. Um, and every year, as we see, there's more and more that's said about what boards have to do. And what we do know is that it's still a great job. It's still an important job. And although the game plan and the playbook may have changed slightly because of 2020, the best is in front of them. And in the work that we've done on the agendas, which you'll find on our websites, sort of goes much deeper than what we've done here in picking out a few issues that are deeply important. So I hope folks go and peruse those, think deeply about the agenda for the coming year, and wish everyone Godspeed and good luck going forward.